Look at a tree, a flower, a plant. Who is looking? It's deeper than you. Pure consciousness arises within you, devoid of any form. That is the inner space of pure perception. Let nature teach you what calm is. Calmness is our essential nature. Just see and hear. Nothing else is needed. Whenever there is silence around you, listen to it. This simply means perceiving it and paying attention. See that when you perceive the silence around you, you are not thinking. You are aware of the silence, but you are not thinking. And when you perceive silence, you are present. Most people spend their entire lives imprisoned within the limits of their own thoughts. They never go beyond the narrow, preconceived ideas of the sense of self. In you, as in every human being, there exists a dimension of consciousness much deeper than thought. We can call it presence, perception, or unconditioned consciousness. In ancient religious teachings, this consciousness is the inner Christ or your Buddha nature. As long as you perceive only the small self in its limited perception, it leads your life, and thus you are in suffering. Not only what you create for yourself, but what you spread to others. Discovering this new dimension of perception is what frees you from this suffering. The thinking mind is a useful and powerful tool, but it becomes very limiting when it invades your life, preventing you from realizing that the mind is just a small aspect of the consciousness that you are. Wisdom is not a product of thought. Thinking fragments reality, cutting it into small pieces, into small concepts. Attention is the primary intelligence. Consciousness itself, it dissolves the barriers created by thought, leading us to recognize that nothing exists in and of itself. Intelligence unites the person who perceives, the perceived object, in the unified field of perception. It is attention that heals separation. Identification with thought is the basic illusion. You are not an angry, resentful, sad, or fearful person. Boredom, anger, sadness, and fear are not yours. They are not part of your person. They are states of the human mind, and therefore come and go. Nothing that comes and goes is you. Any kind of prejudice shows that you are identified with the thinking mind. It shows that you are not seeing the other human being, and you are seeing only your concept about that human being. The next step in evolution is to transcend thought. This doesn't mean that we should no longer think, but simply that we should not identify with thought or be dominated by it. The mind fears not knowing. So, when you can be at ease with not knowing, you are already beyond the mind. A deeper knowledge that is not based on any concept will emerge from this state, and right actions happen spontaneously, and it's not you who does them. Having complete mastery of life is the opposite of controlling it. You come into tune with the greater consciousness. It is she who acts, speaks, and does what is necessary. The mind is always wanting to feed itself to think, and it seeks food for its own identity, for itself. The sense of being is how the ego creates and recreates itself continuously. When you think or talk about yourself, when you say I, you are referring to me and my story. You're talking about the ego with its likes and dislikes, fears and desires, the ego that is never satisfied for long. This is the notion that your mind has of you, conditioned by the past and seeking to find its fulfillment in the future. You realize that this ego is fleeting and transient, like a wave on the surface of the sea. When each thought absorbs all your attention, it shows that you identify with the voice that is inside your head, and thought then becomes confused with the sense of self. This is the self created by the mind, what we call the ego. This mind-constructed ego feels totally incomplete and precarious. Therefore, fear and desire are the emotions and dominant and motivating forces of this ego. When you realize that there is a voice in your head that claims to be you and doesn't stop talking, you realize that, unconsciously, you have been identifying with the stream of thought. When living through the ego, you make the present moment merely a means to an end. When you give more attention to what you are doing than to the results you want to achieve with the situation, you break the old, self-centered conditioning. See what you are doing to yourself, or rather, what your mind is doing to you. Witness your inner state. You don't need to do anything else beyond that. And by realizing this, transformation and freedom will come. Complaining and reacting are the mind's preferred ways to strengthen the ego. For many people, much of their mental and emotional activity consists of complaining and reacting against this or that. They try to make others wrong and only themselves right. And being right, they feel superior and thus strengthen the ego. Stop for a moment and think, do you have these behavior patterns? Can you recognize the voice in your mind that is always complaining and pointing to others as guilty? The self-centered self needs conflict to strengthen its identity. By fighting against something or someone, it demonstrates to itself that this is me and that is not me. It is common for countries, tribes, and religions to seek to strengthen their sense of collective identity by opposing their enemies. Ego identity depends on comparison and feeds on more. It clings to anything. And when none of this works, people seek to strengthen their ego by considering themselves more unfairly treated by life, sicker, or unhappier than others. What are the stories you create to find your own identity? The self-centered self also needs to oppose, exist, and exclude to maintain the idea of separation on which its survival depends. Thus, it puts me against others and us against them, and the ego needs to be in conflict with someone or something. Guilt is another way the ego has to create an identity. For it doesn't matter whether the identity is negative or positive. What you did or didn't do was a manifestation of unconsciousness, which is natural to the human condition. Yes, but the ego personifies the situation and says, I did such, and thus creates an image of itself as bad, flawed, insufficient. Confusion, anger, depression, violence, and conflicts arise when human beings forget who they are. However, it is so simple to remember the truth and thus return to the origins. I am not my thoughts, I am not my emotions, my sensory perceptions, and my experiences. I am not the content of my life. I am the space in which all things happen. I am consciousness. I am the now. Now is inseparable from who you are at the deepest level. You don't find peace by rearranging the facts of your life, but by discovering who you are at the deepest level. All the misery in the world comes from a personalized notion of self or us. From the moment you do this, your great motivating force becomes protecting and valuing this false notion of self. And the truth is, you don't have a life. You are life. You are life, the one, the unique consciousness that permeates the entire universe and temporarily takes the form of rock, leaf, animal, person, star, or galaxy. Can you perceive that deep down you know this? And can you perceive that you already are this? You need time for most things in life, but it is useless for the most valuable, the only one that really matters. Personal realization, which means knowing who you are beyond the surface of the self, beyond the name, physical type, your history. You are knowledge, you are consciousness, through which everything is known, and which cannot know itself, for you are consciousness itself. There is nothing to be known beyond that. You cannot become an object of knowledge of consciousness. You are consciousness itself. And when you know who you really are, you have an enormous, intense sense of peace. Through you, formless consciousness becomes conscious of itself. No matter what the external situation is, the peace that exists within you always remains the same. And the miracle is that when you stop making impossible demands, all situations, people, places, and facts become satisfactory, serene, peaceful. When you fully accept the present moment, when you stop arguing with what is, the compulsion to think diminishes and is replaced by a calm alertness. And you become fully aware, but your mind doesn't give any label to this moment. Do you think I'm saying enjoy the moment, be happy? No, I'm telling you to accept this moment as it is. That's enough. And surrender consists of surrendering to this moment, and there is no story through which you interpret this moment. And when you fully accept that you don't know, you give up, struggling to find the answer, using the thought of your limited mind. And by giving up, you allow a greater intelligence to act through you. Give up. Let life be